it possible to beat every shrine in Tears of the Kingdom without jumping or paragliding? Just like in the Breath of the Wild version of this run I did, the premise of the rules are simple: no jumping or paragliding. However, Tears of the Kingdom has more mechanics that, to be frank, cause this challenge to be trivial, so I decided to add even more restrictions since I found it too easy with only the first two rules. Specifically, I'm also rolling the Ascend rune off limits. I'll be attempting to do as many shrines as possible without fuse shields, I'll try to avoid recall as much as possible, I'll try to avoid as many glitches as possible, and I'll try and find unique solutions instead of repeating ones. While there are a few cases where I need a fuse shield or a glitch, if I'm able to find another way around them, I will. Some people might wonder why I'm rolling Ascend off. Well, first, the run would be way too easy, and second, we had some debate on my stream about whether Link jumps or gets pulled up by some magical powers, so I just erred on the side of caution and disallowed it. Also, you'll notice that the footage flips between an early and late save, since originally I used recall a bunch, but after completing the shrines, I revisited a bunch to find more interesting solutions, since I felt recall made too many things too easy. So, with the rules set, let's get started. As normal, we start in the Great Sky Island, and luckily there's no intended jump until after we meet Rauru. I should mention though that on the way down, there's a spot where hot-footed frogs can be found, and I grabbed these as they'll be necessary later. Getting to the first shrine only requires some climbing and falling, but still no intended jumps. Inside Ukou, the Ultra Hand rune already intends for us to skip everything by making bridges, so we can start a counter and knock off Shrine 1. Outside, there's a bunch of planks that can be fused together to make a very long bridge. This was useful since I could carry it with me, and the few sections that were intended to jump here, I could just use this massive bridge to cross. Shrine 2 is in Issa, and it's done completely normally as it never intended for us to jump anyways. The route to Shrine 3 looks blocked at first since we can't hop onto the carts for the rails, but luckily it's possible to step up onto them without a jump. Once out of the cave, it again looks like we're at an impasse to get up, but by cutting down the trees and making a bridge out of them, we could just walk to the shrine. Once inside Gutenbach, we're faced with the reality that this shrine has a hard requirement of using Ascend. Without Ascend, jumping, or fuse shields like rocket shields, this seems like a hard sticking point for the run. Even though we can't get rocket shields this early, there is something else we can get. Bomb flowers. They're not as great as rocket shields, but they are something, and there happens to be exactly 8 of them in the Great Sky Islands. At this point, I also use those hot-footed frogs from earlier to make a 3-tier speed elixir for my Gutenbach plan. The idea is simple. If you shield surf while in the air onto a bomb shield, you'll get blasted up, and this should get us up every section of the shrine. But of course, there's that little elephant in the room, which is getting into the air without jumping. Well, as it turns out, the little figures near the entry stairwell at every shrine can be climbed onto without a jump. With the 3-tier speed elixir, I can run off of it and get just enough airtime to pull out the shield, resulting in a bomb launch up. However, there isn't anything on the second floor that I could step up on, so I had to retry a ton of times so I could chain them to get a sequence of 3 repeated launches that landed me on the highest platform. This isn't enough to finish the shrine though, because once up top we have no way to do this again, or at least so it appears. After clearing the Guardian, there's 2 boxes that can be moved around with Ultra Hand, so I thought I could rotate them or fuse them in a way that would get me onto them. Unfortunately, while I could step onto one by hanging one over the edge, I didn't really have anywhere to go from there. This did give me an idea though. If I could place them near the edge, then drop down and bomb myself back up onto them, then I could get somewhere. Doing this sequence was definitely tricky, and I messed it up quite a lot, and if I missed any bomb launch, I had to restart since I needed all 8 bombs exactly to clear the shrine. Eventually though, I did manage to nail this launch and get on top of the boxes. From there, I could use Ultra Hand to very slowly move myself to the next section. When close to the bridge, I would move one box up top since I needed it there, then fall into another bomb launch to get to the next section. At this point, there wouldn't be a way onto the last box, but luckily the bridge can be lifted with the Ultra Hand and the box fused to make a ramp that could be ran off of. Funny enough, if I tried to do this last section with the speed elixir, I was too fast, so I had to wear off the speed elixir before doing the last launch. Without the speed boost, I could run off the ramp and then chain bomb jumps onto the moving platform, and, if timed right, I'd hit the platform and then bounce up to the end and finally beat Shrine 3. Man, that one was tough for an early shrine. Now it's time for the last one on the Great Sky Island, which is Nicoya. The path to Nicoya is up a wall that we can't climb, and I'd already exhausted all the bombs in the island, so I couldn't use them to do an impromptu jump. However, since this is the overworld and not a shrine, I can spawn wings in, then bridge them together to just walk up to the 4th shrine. Most of this shrine can be completed normally, except the very first boat. Link won't step up the first platform, so I had to use Ultra Hand to make a path for recall that could get him to the first platform. After that, though, the rest is done normally, and never needed jumps to begin with. With all the starting shrines done, I could finally use recall to get the heart, and then drop wings to bridge across to return the Master Sword. Before we free roam the rest of the shrines, I wanted to mention that a chunk of shrines are done normally, and never require jumping or paragliding to begin with. Most of these are things like combats or blessing shrines. I've listed these on screen, but won't show them directly since they don't require any unique solutions and were just cleared like a normal playthrough. Now that we can free roam, I chose Tajikats first, which is surprisingly straightforward. To first platform, we have a log that can be ultra-handed to use as a ramp to get up to Section 2. In Section 2 there's more logs, but not quite enough to walk to the next section, and there's not a great way to position it to help either. While using recall to get up is an option, it turns out you can actually fuse 3 logs into one more from the next level. By doing so, it can be brought down and then used to make a proper ramp up to the next section. In fact, the rest of this shrine can be completed by just fusing these logs together and walking across them. Next up is Susuyai, and it's pretty much done normally, but I wanted to mention that I had to use the small ledge as a way to step up onto these machines. Geoson. At a first glance, I didn't think this one would be very difficult, but it turned out to prove me wrong. At first, I did this by using recall to get across, then using it again to climb my way up and over the fence to the end, actually skipping the final room. That said, I wasn't very satisfied with using recall, so I found a bit more elegant solution. For the first gap, it's possible to angle the X-shaped bridge so that you can just walk directly up it without recall. For the last room and the double block, there's actually not a way to get on top of it in the last room without recall. At least that's what I thought, until I found out that Link can step up the hole in the fence where you push it through. With this step up, you can pull the block close and then step up onto it without a jump. Once on top, bombs can be used to push you and the block around the room until it's at the steps near the end. During this process, I managed to flip the block off its side, and at first I thought I was stuck. Then I realized I could probably just use more bombs to tilt it again, and wound up getting a super lucky angle where I could just walk up to the end of the shrine. So this one turned out to not need recall at all. Next up, I tackled Isho Dog, which turned out to have a very similar scenario. In the first room, there's a fan in the wall where you're supposed to paraglide up. My instinct was to climb onto the fan and then use recall to pull myself up. However, this fan can be used in a much more interesting way. By turning it on, it will get pushed against the wall, and since the wall is curved, it's possible to run up then stand on the fan. Unfortunately, there isn't a position that makes it work out nicely, so it's not a viable method. What is though, is strapping a ton of bombs onto the bottom of it and dragging it back to the starting staircase. By standing on it then detonating the bombs, Link gets flung up to the next platform. The next section is done normal with a fan boat, and for the final platform, bombs can be stacked underneath it before getting onto it. Then, once you step in, shoot the bombs and it'll shoot Link up to the top. At Kochiyu is another one where I initially used recall for all 3 sections, then found a better method later. The first room can be solved exactly like my no abilities run, by dropping a piece of wood and lighting it to get across. For the block in room 2, Link can just climb on it, and from there, octoballoons can get him to the top. Room 3 has a gap that has to be cleared, so you might think that's a hard requirement for recall. Luckily, octoballoons are the solution once again. While they only get the block into the air, a Korok Forest can be used to push the block to the end, avoiding the recall use. While Sanaka Walk can be done normally, there is one unique thing to jumpless. If you happen to get to the end of the shrine before having the orb, there's no way to escape and go back to get it, since Link can't step over the rail. So make sure to grab the orb before you reach the final door. Taki Iabon is a blessing that requires nothing special, but since jumping up the wall is off limits, it's easy to get caught by the gloom hands if you don't rush, so that was fun. Korok Shrine, one I actually don't know the normal solution to, but my cheese doesn't require jumping. Just fuse up the stuff you're supposed to build a vehicle out of into a stack and put the orb at the top. Next, climb up, grab the orb, and complete the shrine easily. Q Yo-Yo. If you did it normally, it'd be an issue, but I found an easy cheese in my no abilities run using octoballoons. Basically, if you place the starting ice cube on the corner of the fire plate, it'll open up the door without melting. And this is way easier with Ultra Hand than it was with octoballoons. Aroma Walk is also done normally, but the one section I wanted to mention was the cart at the end. At first, it looks like we'd have to jump in, but it turns out Link can just step up into it. Sutsu I actually redid this one a few times to find an easier solution. Shoot the bomb arrows at the falling orb and blast it back to the start, and if it doesn't go far enough, it's not too hard to catch it with Ultra Hand. From here, the starting plates and stakes can be placed near the end in a way that you could just naturally set the orb in the intended pedestal. Utsu Shot can be done normally, but I didn't think I'd be able to step into these carts without a jump, so I figured I'd show it. Joju was a very interesting shrine. The first bridge is unimpacted, but on bridge 2 there's a gap you're intended to jump over, which is a no-go. I tried a bunch of stuff here, from making fused pillars to octoballooning the bridge up and even detonating bombs to get a bridge launch across. The bomb launch probably would have worked, but I'm ashamed to admit that I spent 2 hours here just to figure out that you can fuse the bridge, then drop a few octoballoons and step over the gap. For the final bridge, I thought I'd get lucky and be able to do it normally, but unfortunately Link can't step up the ledge at the end. So instead, I made the sketchiest bridge ever by balancing the block on the pike and then was able to step up properly and complete the shrine. Kitawak Shrine is arguable on whether it requires a jump or not, so we'll cover it. Basically, the plates are meant to be fused to make bridges, but the second one is the only one that might require a jump, and luckily we could just fuse it diagonally so Link doesn't even have to step up. At the end, you're intended to fuse them to a block and paraglide, but we can just grab both blocks and make a bridge up to the end and skip the shrine's main mechanic. Mayachi Deg is a combat shrine that probably could have skipped this list, but I found it particularly difficult without being able to jump to dodge the constructs. So instead of that, I went around to gather all the Roombas, then unleashed them so I didn't have to fight. Jochi Iyu. I'm honestly not sure what the normal way of doing this shrine is, so I thought I'd cover it. Instead of trying any complicated Jenga, you can just topple the tower and grab the ball before it falls. Rasiwak. Instead of dealing with the first platform normally, I made some ice blocks with choo-choo jellies. You can't step up this gap, so getting on them isn't helpful, but they can be fused to the platform and then climbed on to get up the first ledge. The rest of the shrine is done as normal. Zanbei can be done in a really stupid way, by fusing a bunch of orbs into a chain so you can just grab the one from up top. And a Mimik is done completely normal, however getting into it has a single exception. Once you drain the water for the cave, I couldn't get back up, so I had to warp elsewhere and then come back. Sitsum is also done almost entirely normally, however Link can't step up onto the vehicles. This is easily solved by grabbing a wheel from one of the spares and using it as a ramp. Inside Marakagook, the first bridge is done normally, and the second one mostly too. The only note is that you need to step up onto the bridge before it's fully unfurled, otherwise Link can't step up onto it. The only other section impacted is where you would use Ascend, but you can just position the machine like a ramp to walk up the Ascend section. Mayak Shrine has a pillar at the start that shoots us into the air, and while we can't paraglide, we can start a dive to get some distance and land on the top. From here, we can complete the first part of the puzzle as normal. We can actually get to the next section using the same diving technique, even without the wingsuit. In the last room, not having the paraglider doesn't stop us from reaching anywhere, but it does mean that I had to retry a few times to get the timing right on the falling orb, and it's advisable to have a fairy or two. Timawag Shrine is easily cheesed by fusing a bridge together in the first room and using it to get everywhere. By rotating it slightly, you could even get it through the door to the last room to get the hydrants, then just walk across to the end. Sapapa Shrine is done entirely normal. However, when I put in the orb to unlock the last room, I ran into an issue where I couldn't step up the ledge to get back. Turns out that if you're running, you can actually step up higher ledges than when you're walking, and I actually didn't know this till now. Inside of Runikit Shrine, there's actually no issue with getting the ball down like normal. But getting to the ball and getting back from it is another issue. Since paragliding is off limits, the only option we've got is the rails, and the first one can be surprisingly stepped up on. Tight roping across these is a bit difficult, but once you've made it to each platform, if you fall, it'll at least respawn you back on the relevant platform. As for the second rail, the blocks nearby can be used to get on top, and the final rail can once again just be stepped on. Going in the reverse direction, the second rail is an issue again, but the cylinder pieces can be used as a ramp, and even make it easy to fall into a shield slide to make the tight roping easier. The final rail back can be cleared similarly with the ramp pieces they gave us, clearing out Runikit. Getting into Rockawalk is one of the first overworld problems since we can't burn the spikes here. However, we can just spawn a wing to walk over them. The inside is pretty straightforward, with carrying blocks that we could climb on, and the only potential use of recall is at the end, and can be easily skipped by just turning the blocks diagonally and stacking them. In Gasas Shrine, normally Link can step across the first block without falling, but by cramming a speed elixir this is no longer an issue. This block can be recycled in the next section, and laid diagonally near the next gap, and with the elixir still active, it's possible to run up then step across. The rest of the shrine is done completely normally. Iana Rock is barely worth mentioning, since there's a billion ways to cheese this shrine, but my go-to this time was just dropping the orb on the target and then fusing one to my weapon to throw it. Mayasi is done 99% normally except for this single ledge. For this, you can actually just lay some barrels on their side and then walk up. In order to get into Oshisan-U, I had to make a wing device to get some airtime, then jump off onto the shrine. Otherwise, it's done completely normally. Otak is also done normally, but I had a bit of trouble getting into the shrine due to not being able to side hop the enemies. The quick cheese for this is to simply drop a save every time you move a little bit, then reload in order to get in without getting killed. Josiu is the first Sky Island shrine I'll tackle, and of course, navigating the sky will be more difficult without paragliding. When I initially did this run, I used recall to get a wing with fans and a steering stick into the sky, but as I was editing this, I realized I was overlooking a very simple solution of putting this machine on a cart then launching it that way. With a wing with 3 fans on it, it'll fly plenty far enough to make it to the Josiu Island. Once on the island, you're normally intended to recall, but being in the overworld means that we can spawn and fuse devices freely. So I dropped a bunch of wings to make a bridge that I could carry the crystal across for shrine complete. In Ryagok, the first room is normal, but the second room you're intended to use Ascend. However, the rods they give you to solve the shrine puzzles can be used to make a makeshift rail that Link can walk up. It's actually pretty hard to stay on this, until I realized there was a simple solution of just putting against the wall and walking up. It's not the most elegant way to climb these platforms, but it'll do for all 3 levels. Orochium stumped me for a while. See, there are 3 problems here. The first is a laser trap that is at the start. Next is that the key would require a sin. And then once you get to the key, you get stuck without a way to return to the start of the shrine with said key. I messed around a bunch with those lasers, and one of my better ideas was to try and ragdoll Link through them, but unfortunately I could never find an angle that worked. I did find it was possible to walk against the wall for a short period after activating the trap, but it never got me far enough, and seemed to always kick me off after a short period. So for the first bit, I was able to use the same trick from the Ascend Shrine to fall onto a bomb shield and bounce over the laser trap. This gets us to the second part, which has absolutely nothing to work with inside the hallway. Luckily, we could start outside the hallway and use the fall from the trap to get into a bomb shield launch. However, the angling here is very tricky. Things have to be timed just correctly to bounce past the trap and avoid all lasers across the whole room while swapping shields in between every bounce. But with just the right angle, it's possible to get to the platform with the key. From here, the door back is closed, so normally you'd need a sin. But since the key is something that goes to our inventory, it's perfectly acceptable to just warp out of the shrine and re-enter, and Link will still have the key. From here, I once again needed more bomb shields to get back past the entry lasers, but luckily the portion to get the orb up and get it back to the start doesn't normally require jumps, so that makes shrine complete. Sonapan is another unfortunate case of not having anything to work with, so I had to use the bomb shield trick once again to get up the first platform to avoid using a sin. The second room looks like a great place to do bomb shield launches again, but unfortunately there's not really a way to fall into it. There is a block in this room though, so choosing it with recall is the easy answer, but I found a more interesting way of using this block. If you create an ice block, then fuse it so that it'll hold this block up diagonally, you can load bombs in the gap between them. Ice blocks are easy to climb, and once up top, a fire weapon can be equipped to break the fusion and launch Link up to the end of the shrine. Makasura is another shrine I had to use bomb shields to get past the starting area since there was nothing to work with and the intended recall is off limits. Once up, there's a stabilizer with a grate, and by standing on it while triggering the stabilizer, Link will get launched. Unfortunately, it's not enough to get across, unless you have the wingsuit, in which case you can. However, after a bit more investigation, I found out that you can do it even easier, just by putting the second stabilizer onto the first. With this little bit of added height, Link will perfectly get launched across with no other requirements. Unlocking the doors and items nearby is done like normal, except Link needs to be slingshot out instead of using a sin, and with all parts collected, I fused one massive stabilizer slingshot and got Link all the way across. Inside Sahiro, there's a laser that we can't hop over, but luckily you can just stand on the other side of it, so this is one of the most pointless lasers I've ever seen. But of course, the lasers wouldn't be that easy, as the next ones are on the trap itself. At first, I got past this using rocket shields, but after experimenting, I found it's possible to use a speed elixir, then run over the base of the first laser to skip it. Most of the others are dodged normally, and by running up the steps on the right side, it's just possible to make it through all of them. Unfortunately, at this point, I had to resort to an octoballoon shield since there was nothing to work with to get up. The ending laser section I've always just ran through at the last second, which means no ascend or jumping required. After a graceful descent, I entered Gatanasis next. Hitting the target is trivial, but getting up to the unlocked door is another story. I tried using the metal orb in many ways, from octoballoons to bomb launches, and ultimately I couldn't find anything that worked. So in the end I needed to use recall, but I did at least find two ways of using it. The first is to recall the spring platform and then enter a dive to splat at the shrine exit. And the other actually involves using Ultra Hand to get the orb near the end, then using recall to step onto it and ride it up. Mogawak is a simple shrine and you can do it entirely normally, unless you step into the platform that goes up, because you can't step back out. This is easily fixed by standing on the railing when you ride it up. Ihan Ah. This shrine has hoverstones everywhere, and due to this, you could use these as a bridge to cross every gap in the shrine without needing any jumping at all. Apogak Shrine. Another almost done normally, except for the part where you're supposed to paraglide up. Instead, one of the wings can be used as a convenient ramp to just walk up. Ijo O. Surprisingly, using a very simple wing and fan device, it's possible to make it all the way to the island from one of the peaks of the ground below. This shrine is all about fusing shields, but I decided I'd tackle this one without them. Since the second room has a plate, you could just use Ultra Hand on it to block the fire, but the third room is the only one where you might need a fused shield. Luckily, you could just keep the plate from the fire, and then fuse a rocket to it against the wall and fly up to the shrine exit. The first floor of Tarakamik can be done normally by riding up the tooth of the gear instead of in between the teeth. Once up the next floor, I really couldn't find anything to work with, so I had to resort to a rocket shield here, though an octoballoon one should work too. Once up, the last floor is done completely normally. Mayatat Shrine. Despite looking like we need recall, all of the falling sleds in room 1 can be grabbed and fused together to make one of the world's sketchiest bridges that leads up to the next floor. In the last room, we could technically do it normally, but where's the fun there? All you need to do to cheese it is eat some speed up food and drag a sled to the end. The sled is only used as a step up on the final ledge, since Link can't step up it without a jump. For Kudanasar, the planks in the moving sand can be used to build a bridge across the first section and as a ramp over the rail. Once across the bridge, we can grab it again to get up the ladder and up to the orb. If I continue doing this like normal, it is possible to use Ultra Hand and Recall to fetch the orb from the other side, but since I wanted to avoid Recall, I was actually able to recycle my method from my No Abilities video by dropping shields and campfires to prevent the orb from getting slung across. Mayamat's is next, and the first task is crossing the gap with nothing to work with, so this is going to be a mandatory use of fused shields. That said, we need both forward and upward momentum, and rockets can only go up. Octobloons don't get pushed by the draft, and bombs can't clear the gap. I did get lucky and landed on the rail, which could be tightrope walked on, but there's an even easier way. By starting with a fall onto a bomb shield, then switching to a rocket one mid-air, we could make the rocket carry us mostly forward while getting the height from the bomb, and this will clear the first gap nicely. Once to the next level, I was forced to use a fuse shield again, this time an Octobloon shield, to get up a gap since there was nothing to work with. For the orb, I could have recycled my No Abilities method of chucking Octobloons and bombs, but this time I wasn't having any luck rolling it out. I had considered using Recall or a fuse shield, but then I had an idea. If I fused the orb I had already gotten onto it, I could probably just Ultra Hand it down, but unfortunately it wasn't within the reach of Ultra Hand. So after thinking a bit, I realized I could use pieces of wood as a sort of handle to let me grab it with Ultra Hand, and this worked surprisingly well. From there, it was just a matter of rolling the orb down and using another bomb and rocket shield combo to get back and finish off the shrine. Rutsumamu is surprisingly done normally. Despite having a gap in the first and second ramp, simply running up both will get Link to step over the gap in both instances. As for the last one, I cheesed it by grabbing the plate and just using it like a ramp. Jinnadog Shrine can be reached by starting from the Great Sky Island with 3 fans, a wing, and a control stick, which just barely reaches before running out of time. Once across, the same type of device can be used to navigate the island and clear it completely without the paraglider. Rakashag can be reached the same way as long as we have Zonai charges to refill the battery, and then the interior is done normally. This method also made Ukujisi easy since I just fused the crystal to the wing to get it back to the shrine. Back onto the ground ones, I went to Chichim next, and while there is a section that intends for you to use a Sin, there's nothing stopping us from just climbing up a small gap that exists in the ceiling. Next up is Sawakama Shrine, which we could make easy with Recall Cheese, but that's kinda boring. So instead, a Speed Elixir and Ultra Hand can be used to step onto the orb from the first platform. Then, by slowly walking on it, it can be rolled across, letting Link step up the ledge to the next section. For section 2, I recycled the orb from the first and fused it to the second and attempted the same trick. Unfortunately, this didn't work no matter what the angle, so the only correct route from there was to bomb myself up the gap. The same strategy can be used with the final gap as well, with all 3 orbs fused together to get the needed height. Karahatag is a shrine that I missed when I was counting the ones that weren't impacted by this run, so I'll count it now. Isasim is done mostly normal, but I needed to grab Unibo from his quest in order to unlock the shrine. While there aren't any required jumps in this one, there is a required recall, which I figured out how to skip in post. There are bombs and barrels near the ledge that we need recall for, and even though the bombs alone weren't enough to get over, I figured I could still do something with this. As it turns out, it's possible to use the tiny ledge before them to get on top of the barrels, and while they're extremely hard to stay on and use the trick from Gutenbach on, I did find that I could fuse them together to pull me across the room. With the 3 bombs fused together sideways and being on the barrels, the explosion would just barely let me clear the edge, skipping the need for recall. Next up is Wow-Os, and the idea here is actually really simple. We can use bomb arrows to trigger the switches, and then use the seesaw as a catapult. Sor Yotanag is a really tricky shrine that I wound up solving by using recall to get myself and some fans into the light room in order to set up the reflection for. But before we roll that counter, I wasn't too satisfied with needing recall, so after a lot of digging, I found a significantly jankier way to solve this. Instead of trying to get into the room myself, I made this abomination of a fusion, then used Ultra Hand to drop it in the other room. From there, the goal was to use it to position the reflector, but it kept falling over, so I had to refuse it a few times from the other side of the bars to find a way to make it balance, and then ran into the problem with the light going into the floor before it reached this room. So after a bit more fusion Tetris, I came up with this fan spear stick fan reflector duct tape solution and managed to get the light to the final door without recall. Domizuine, and despite how much I'd love to find a non-fused shield solution, there just isn't much to work with in this shrine, so 2 rocket shields get us to the end. The obvious solution in Morok would also be rocket shields, but I've got a better idea. On the main floor of the shrine, there's 4 springs, and they intend for you to bounce back and forth and paraglide. That said, if you launch 3 of the springs to the far platform, which is a bit higher than the main one, you can launch off of them and then use the glide suit to dive to the exit. Back in the sky and using the same flying machine as earlier, it's not too hard to get to In Oma from the Great Sky Island, but I had to turn off the machine a bit to drop the height needed without dying. Otherwise, it's done normally. Sabanjitak is up next, and regardless of how you slice it, this one's gonna need fuse shields. 1 rocket shield was the least amount that I could come up with. Another one I missed in my initial done as normal shrines was Gimami, so at least enjoy me doing it in one of the stupidest ways I could think of. Jakais is unfortunately another shrine with not much to work with, so I had to use fuse shields here to get vertical height. For Kahatanam, I started from Mayamekas and used fuse devices to navigate upwards towards the shrine. It's a blessing shrine and I didn't really struggle getting up, so it's an easy addition to the counter. The path to Tananud is a bit more eventful since it's too far to fly directly to. In order to make it there, I had to park the wing on the flying boats and floating platforms, which was way harder than it looks. I was using pins on the map to navigate, but finding where to launch and how to fly in this weather actually sucked and took me a really long time. As for the shrine itself, it's just fetching a crystal, and the floating platforms can be used to easily carry it back and forth. Tinbez is a shrine we could do normally, however, getting there is a bit of a problem. In short, any device we can make will despawn before I can reach it, and the blocks we used for the Tananud crystal can't make it either. Luckily, spawning a wing before the block timer runs out is more than enough to arrive at the shrine. Mayam was another interesting one to reach, as a standard wing with rockets couldn't get me close enough from Tinbez, and using the block and wing technique from Tananud didn't cut it either. The answer actually turned out to be to deck out my wing even more, with multiple rockets and even more fans. But this is the first proof I had that I could go further with either 5 fans or rockets. That said, I had to land on this Star Island, which was a bit difficult, and then use a new device to get to the Mayam Island from there. Once there, defeating the construct and piloting the crystal back was child's play. With that blessing retrieved, another wing device can get Link up to Samosa Walk, and the diving section can be done normally. The interior is a combat with nothing special and is done like normal. However, this shrine had a bonus since it started getting me the diving suit. Yansamin was one I wasn't sure if I could get to, but with the new Ultra Wing design, I was able to land near the control panel. A second wing can be used from there to get to the top, and in that process, I learned that these wings are affected by wind shafts, which I surprisingly didn't know before this. From here, the path in is clear, but the inside is a bit tricky to navigate jumpless. Like, there's not any explicit jumping required if you use recall of the hoverstones or fuse shields, but it just felt very weird to navigate without jumping. The first time I went through, I made heavy use of recall and fuse shields, but I came back and did it later without either. In order to do it without these, my main strategy was to launch a hoverstone with a moving pillar to get over to the rockets. One of these would clear out the rocks atop the moving pillar, and then I could just keep launching up and falling to the other platforms until everything was clear. Joku isn't problematic distance-wise, but finding it in the clouds is difficult. Regardless, enough repeated attempts can solve that problem, knocking off another shrine since it's a blessing. Siamotsus requires you to launch from as far out as possible on the nearby island, otherwise you won't quite make it. Once inside, the puzzle can be solved normally, and with our one piece of the glide suit, we can steer a fall directly to the shrine end. For Ikatak, the main problem is getting back out of the hole with a crystal, and during my run I used recall. Unfortunately, this crystal doesn't respawn, but in hindsight I could have fused the crystal, then used a balloon with a platform to fish it back out instead of recall. For the interior of Mayamekas, you need at least one piece of the glide suit in order to navigate between these sailboats. It's probably easier with more pieces, but I used the very edge of the first boat to just make it to the second. Once that gap is cleared, the rest of the shrine can be done normally, minus the glider, and is easy in comparison to the first gap. For Jira to Gumak, I decided to start from the ground, even though I couldn't get quite enough height. Luckily, there's a star-shaped island partway up that can be landed on first, and after launching again, I was able to get to the floating spear that holds the shrine. Once inside, you can assemble a wing, cart, and fan as intended and get to the end easily. From Jira to Gumak, Igashon is an easy reach, and while you'd think you need a jump for the inside, the only spots you would is out of these floating orb bubbles, but in both cases you can just run out of them and climb up the ledges. For Mayanas, finding a spot to launch from was difficult, but I wound up using Mount Lanayru Tower as a starting point. From here, it's possible to land on the diving island, then use a second wing to get out to another intermediary island, then the resting fan plate machines to finish the distance upwards. These machines also make a great device for fetching the crystal and getting it to the shrine. Once inside, the interior is done normally. From Mayanas, the pre-built devices can be used to get up to Siajog, and once up, the dive and interior are done normally. Next up is Gatakas, and this one took a lot of creativity, as even with fuse shields, finding an answer was not straightforward. The gaps are just really large, and even then, the ending section felt completely hopeless without glitches or shields. For the first gap, I'm stealing a trick from the Great Sky Island section, and using the opening stairs to get a bomb launch to get airborne. Then, after a second chain launched, switching to the glide suit to clear the first gap. Starting the next section though, we didn't really have anything to work with, so what I wound up doing was using an octoballoon shield to get height, then launching off of a bomb shield, changing to a dive to get forward momentum, using another bomb shield to get more height and momentum, then swapping to a rocket shield to burst over the gap. This trick is surprisingly difficult to nail, but it does get you over the gap. Despite that, up next is arguably the worst part with this fan shaft. In short, we're supposed to paraglide up the last section, but instead I use the glide suit to land on one of the lanterns, though you might need a ferry. Once here, a rocket shield can get you airborne again, and with the wind in this section you can interrupt it and dive slowly to somewhat easily land at the lights on the other side. Past this point, it's basically chaining the same technique upwards and trying to avoid the other lights above until you finally reach the top. While the interior of Igashuk is done normally, getting up is not intuitive, so I thought I'd showcase it. In short, I just added a balloon and flamethrower to a sled and went straight up the wall. Jogo is also done normally, but I didn't have anything to help with the slick walls, so I just used a wing to cheese my way in. Jojoan is another almost done normal shrine, except for the construct at the bottom, who never saw those explosive barrels coming. Up next is Tatarok, and getting across the first bits is done normally, but the ending sequence is another story. If I just gave in and used recall, it'd be an easy shrine, but I figured that there should be a way without recall. In short, it's possible to fuse the boxes together to make a sort of ramp up to the platform. From there, you'd think you could just do something similar to get up, but the top platform always just seemed to be barely out of reach. Being this close though, a quick bomb arrow can solve the issue and finish the shrine. Sariwak, and while everything is done normally, there are a few spots I thought might be confusing, so I featured it. For the leggings, I got up through the ceiling gap with a balloon device that just barely fits through. Not being able to dodge the Yiga for the armor was a bit difficult, but if you go while there's lightning, then you need to dodge a lot less. As for the frog altars, besides being slow to reach, they don't pose any issues. Owagim is done normally, but I wanted to mention it since I thought you had to glide in at first, and I thought others might have had the same assumption, but nothing about it requires gliding, just climbing. Jochiyahiga is done normally, but I forgot to mention in the intro, and since I've already corrected the shrine counter over 20 times, you can just take some footage, because I'm not doing it again. For Zakusu, I found it easier to dive from Mayanas to reach the dive platform than to try and fly up from the closest tower. This shrine has a shield surf quest, which starts by diving down from the Sky Island. Since we can't glide, the impact will kill us, but with a ferry that's not a problem, and the rest of the shield surfing can be done normally. At first, the interior was quite difficult to navigate without the glider, but I found out that it's possible to run up the walls, and doing so eliminates all issues this challenge introduces for this shrine. With a wing device, reaching Sarah to Bomac is quite trivial. For the interior, I used the plate at the bottom with a bunch of bombs to launch up into the air, and with a dive suit, I could just use a controlled fall to the end. For an attack, there really isn't much special besides how you would normally do it. Just instead of gliding or jumping, I used a wing to get around, since the glide suit wasn't quite enough to get to the platform with the crystal. From the attack, it's just barely possible to make it to Gikaku. The crystal for this one is directly up, so I actually opted for a balloon and rocket combo instead of a wing, since there's a hover platform above which makes it easier to reach the crystal. With the crystal in hand, a fairy can be used to tank the drop and complete Gikaku. While you can't fly straight to Mogasari, there is a tiny island on the way to it that makes a good pit stop. Taking off from that island, it's possible to reach it, and then the interior is done normally. Or at least I think this is normal, right? Sarah to Bomac can be used as a starting point to reach Karanar, with a stop on this little island. Which, by the way, apparently you Nobo can somehow appear. Where did you come from, and how did you get here? Once inside, the hydrants can be used to make a bridge that can be used to walk across to every section. Kumamane is another shrine in the Sky Islands, but can be reached by starting from Yonsamen and using a wing device. The crystal can be stolen instead of fighting, and from there it's a simple journey of using the springs to get it back to the shrine. Ga Ahisas has a little more roundabout way of reaching, which requires flying from Ijo-O to the King Gliok Island, and from there to a lower island, and then from that lower island up, which only works due to the lower gravity in this region. Once to Ga Ahisas, everything can be done as intended, except when you would jump. You just swim or climb to reach the next platform to unlock a blessing. Once back out, a standard wing is enough to get down to Gano's shrine, which doesn't require any jumping or paragliding normally. From Gano's to Tani, it's just a bit too far of a distance for a standard wing, but with a 5-fan wing, you can barely make it. The dive section to reveal the shrine is done normally, but once inside, this one is a tutorial which expects us to use the air shafts and hit the enemies during bullet time. You'd expect us to need a fuse shield here, but by stepping up the step at the start of the shrine, you can enter bullet time before landing on the ground, meaning this shrine can be cleared by simply falling and never jumping or using shields to get air. Out from Tani, a wing device can go straight to Mayasiar and its island. The goal of this one is to glide between islands to position these reflectors for lights, but as it turns out, due to the low gravity, it's quite easy to just use trampolines in the dive suit to get between them all. The easiest way to navigate this place I found was to just drop to the bottom of the island after positioning each one, and then launch up from the bottom. Climbing is also a decent option, but through a combination of both, opening the shrine is quite easy, banking us 146 total. If you made it this far in, you were probably wondering when I was going to feature the Korok Forest. See, if I did it as intended and used Ascend, it would be a breeze. But as we established in the intro, Ascend is off limits, and if you watched my No Abilities run, the method I used there required infinitely jumping to clip into this area, which isn't gonna cut it this time. I actually have to shout out Suishi here for their tutorial over SDC, or Stick Desync Clip, and in general how to fuse and tangle and do all sorts of shenanigans. I'm not going to properly explain SDC here, since Suishi's video would outclass my tutorial any day, and I also don't want to add another 20 minutes to the video length. In short, I used the memory method to FSFE, fuse storage, fuse and tangle, a steering stick to my weapon. What this does is create a weird state in the game where this steering stick is fused to the weapon we fused it to, while also existing in the overworld at the same time. From here, if I were to stand on the stick and then drop the weapon that the stick is fused to, then mash A to mount it as I close the quick menu, I would clip directly through the ground and keep clipping downwards until I let go of the stick. But instead of doing that here, I decided to drag the stick across the high roll to just where the Korok Forest entrance is. Now I could perform SDC properly and clip beneath. But of course, doing this over Korok Forest voids you out. And yeah, I tried that multiple times, it wasn't just a one-time mistake. So after carrying this stick 30 minutes a bunch of times, I finally decided to try it a bit further away from the Korok Forest, and voila! We clipped out of bounds and between the depths and the overworld, and tanked the fall damage via a ferry. From here, the idea is just to navigate blindly across these weird collisions until reaching the Phantom Ganon fight. Despite being a horribly tedious process, using wings, trampolines, stamina food, and just about whatever I could toss out did manage to get me to the Ganon fight, where I died. But by some miraculous luck, the game saved me out of bounds and I got to finish off Phantom Ganon from out of bounds. After Ganon is defeated, we're allowed to warp out and enter Korok normally, finally opening up some of our missing shrines. For Musanakir, Papunk, and Sakumbamar, there's no issue reaching them or doing them as normal without jumping or gliding. As for the last of the Korok shrines, you're supposed to dive, which would kill you, but once again, a fairy is enough to live and that's all that's needed to clear Shrine 150. Out of the 2 that's left, I'm going to cover Joku Usin first, which presents 2 problems. The first is that we can't clear the clouds because I didn't want to pick up the paraglider, which locks the story. And the second is that we're supposed to use a sim to get into this shrine. Huh, that second part sounds kinda like the problem from Korok Forest, so why not use the same trick? Well, I did in fact use the same trick, but since I had to do this multiple times, you get to watch the sped up version. In short, I had to carry this stupid stick all the way across Hyrule and route around the Gleeok since I didn't want to lose the stick or fight him, and bring it all the way to this spot. These coordinates are very specific since I was on the ground and needed a way up to the island, and my go-to was using octoballoons and rockets on hover stones. There's probably a better way up, but after dragging the stick this far, I did not want to risk falling. So I painfully brought the stick up to the island. Without the clouds being cleared, I needed to navigate blindly just by following coordinates, and then try and perform SDC over top of the shrine. To make it worse, the first time I did this, I caught the edge of the water from the island and failed the trick, so I had to redo it again. The second time, I somehow messed up the glitch for SDC so it didn't even clip, so on to the third time. After doing the painful trip 3 times, I made sure to do this correctly the third time, and managed to get my coordinates right and clip down and drop right in front of the shrine. I am never doing that again. Oh yeah, this shrine is a combat shrine too, so it's super simple once you get in. It was just the getting in that was a pain. And for the final shrine, you'll never guess what is the most difficult one for this run. Keanonis. That's right, it's a tutorial shrine, but what does it teach you? It teaches you how to side hop, because apparently we gotta learn Flurry Rush, but guess what's off limits? So I tried a ton of things here, from hydro clipping and so on, but I really just gotta give a shout out to Yi from the Tears of the Kingdom Discord. If you've seen my All Shrines Without Abilities video, you might remember that there's an infinite jump glitch, which definitely can't be used in our run, but what if I told you that slashing a weapon in midair gives you height? Alright, let's get back to that in a moment. First step, enter Keanonis and trigger the cutscene. This is to prevent the cutscene from interfering with what I'm about to do. Once the Guardian has started our tutorial, the goal is to clip through the floor. Unfortunately, we can't use SDC because we would need that stick we set up, and once we go into the shrine it would deload it. So how are we gonna get through? Well, there's this neat thing called hydro clipping, which can make Link clip through the shrine floor. It's actually pretty simple to perform too, and the only requirement is entering the shrine with a weapon that has a hydrant fused to it, preferably a spear. From there, unequip and re-equip the spear, then toss it and trigger recall. Once recall is triggered, we aren't going to confirm it to actually recall it, but instead we're just going to sit there and stare at the spear for a good amount of time. I usually choose about a minute. After that time has passed, hit crouch to cancel the recall, and the game should lag and let Link slip through the floor. If anyone does want to try this, it's pretty inconsistent, especially in this shrine, so it took me quite a few attempts to get used to it and find a spot where it would clip properly, but it does work. Also, before entering this shrine and doing this, I had to set up arrow smuggling, which was unfortunate because I had updated to version 1.2.1, so most of the methods, especially the easy ones, had already been patched. I'll just link a tutorial, but in short, I did some funky stuff with fusing a bow to a chest and taking it across loading zones inside of a well, but to be honest, I kinda forgot how it works. Regardless of how it works though, what we're trying to achieve is being able to pull out an arrow without a bow. Back into Keanonis, with arrow smuggling set up, and after hydro clipping through the bottom, you can pull out this arrow and not the bow. From there, if you hit the attack button, Link will go to strike, and it'll give him some height which can then be interrupted by pulling the arrow out again. Normally you couldn't interrupt this strike and pull the bow out again, at least not this quick, so that's what arrow smuggling is for. This can be repeated to gain vertical height with the sheer muscle of Link's arms. Look, don't argue with me. I know this is called a jump strike, but he's not jumping in midair. It's called a jump strike because it's a strike after he jumps, and guess what we didn't do? That's right, so this is just a strike. I'm not losing this challenge due to one shrine, so unless you got a better solution, I will maintain that this is using his arm strength and not his legs, and therefore is not canonically a jump. Anyways, using this method, it's possible to get on top of the shrine interior and then move over to the exit. Unfortunately, there's collision up here, so we have to find a way to clip back in. But very fortunately, there's no restriction on taking 2 hydrant spears into a shrine, so I simply used hydro clipping a second time to clip in over the top of the shrine exit, and finish up the final shrine. So yes, you can in fact beat all 152 shrines without jumping or paragliding. Honestly, for a game based in the skies, it was significantly easier than I thought to beat it like this, and comparatively, my Breath of the Wild version of this run was significantly more difficult. So if you enjoyed this, you'd probably enjoy my no jumping and paragliding Breath of the Wild version of the exact same run. If you got this far, consider dropping a like, follow, or commenting to help me out. These really help, especially while I'm trying to get back to regular content on this channel and fix my non-existent upload schedule. And if you'd really like to see that happen, consider supporting me on Ko-fi as well, so I can continue making more content in a timely manner. Thank you for watching, and I hope you enjoyed, and I'll see you in the next Out of the Box Challenge.